The galaxy was vast and cruel, ruled by predators who believed that only strength mattered. Among them were the Vorn, tall, scaled hunters who took pride in their tradition of sport. They captured weaker species for entertainment, throwing them into arenas, forests, and deserts to be hunted. When they discovered humans on the edge of explored space, they expected another easy victory. But humans were strange. They smiled even when outnumbered, fought even when doomed. And when the Vorn took one human named Reed Carter, they made a mistake that would haunt their kind forever. Reed had not been alone on that exploration mission. His companion, a creature the aliens thought to be a small animal, was locked in a separate cage. The Vorn guards laughed when it snarled. They didn't know what it was, a honey badger from Earth. They called it the small beast. In a way, they were right. It was small, but so is a bullet. When the hunt began, Reed was dropped into the jungle moon of Bereth Prime. The air was thick, the sky glowing red, and the alien hunters released their machines to track him. He hid in the shadows, bleeding from his shoulder, watching the Vorn hunt him for pleasure. Every instinct told him to run, but one thought kept him alive. They have her. His honey badger, Nia, was still caged somewhere in their camp. Hours passed. The hunters grew overconfident. They didn't expect a human to know their jungle, to fight back. Reed built traps with vines and metal scraps from crashed drones. One by one, the hunters began to vanish. The jungle started whispering, metal crushed, bodies dragged, screams swallowed by the night. And then the cages opened. Nia escaped. The first Vorn who saw her didn't live long enough to warn the others. Small, black, and furious, she tore through armor with claws that ignored pain and fear alike. The aliens called her a demon. Reed called her my girl. When dawn came, the Vorn expected victory celebrations. Instead, their camp was silent. The guards found trails of blood and broken armor. Something had hunted the hunters. A scout found a sign written in human script on the burned hull of a shuttle. Just 4 words, not prey, never again. The Vorn commander snarled, ripping the sign apart. He ordered his soldiers to track the human and his beast. He promised the galaxy that this would end. But deep down, even he felt the cold seed of doubt. Because the last transmission from the jungle wasn't human. It was the sound of growling, a low, furious growl that echoed through every communication line, followed by static and the fading heartbeat of a dying predator. The hunt had changed. Humanity was no longer the prey, and across the stars whispers began to spread, about a human and a small creature that fought back against an entire race of hunters. They didn't know their names yet, but soon, every predator in the galaxy would. The unexpected. War had begun. The jungle moon of Bereth Prime was not silent anymore. Smoke rose from shattered dropships, and the cries of the Vorn echoed through the dark valleys. Every tree seemed to whisper the same word now. Revenge. Reed Carter moved through the dense undergrowth with his honey badger, Nia, beside him. She padded close to his boots, her fur matted with alien blood, and her small black eyes burning with a strange, almost human focus. The two of them had survived the night, but survival was no longer enough. Reed wanted them to feel what humans had always been forced to feel. Far above, Vorn warships circled the moon, scanning for heat signatures. The hunters had become nervous. They had never lost their prey before. They sent more troops down, armored and armed with plasma rifles. They thought numbers would crush fear, but fear had already entered their bones. Reed crouched by a stream, cleaning his knife. He could see the reflection of his own face, mud, ash, and something new in his eyes. Humanity had always been clever, always underestimated. The Vorn were learning that lesson too late. He whispered to Nia, We finish what they started. The creature gave a low grunt, her fur bristling, and vanished into the bushes ahead. The Vorn patrol didn't even have time to scream. Reed followed the sounds, metal snapping, claws tearing, the faint hiss of plasma weapons discharging into empty air. When he reached the clearing, Naya stood over two fallen aliens, their armor shredded. She looked at Reed as if asking for permission to continue. He nodded once. No mercy. By noon, the jungle floor was littered with broken helmets and discarded weapons. Reed scavenged what he could. Batteries, blades, and comm devices. He used the alien tech to broadcast a message across the jungle's frequencies. It wasn't long, but every word was sharp enough to cut steel. You hunt for sport. I hunt to survive. The Vorn commander, General Vrax, received the message in orbit. His claws clicked against the command table. The thought that a single human and some primitive beast had humiliated his best troops filled him with rage. He ordered his elite force, the Crimson Pack, to land. They were trained killers, silent and ruthless. Vrax told them one thing before they dropped. Bring me the human's head and the animal's hide. Back on the ground, the air grew tense. Birds stopped singing. Even the insects seemed to sense what was coming. Reed felt it too. He tightened the straps on his chest plate and reloaded his scavenged rifle. When Nia returned, her snout was streaked with fresh blood. She gave a low growl, and Reed understood. The Crimson Pack was near. They came at dusk, 12 armored shadows moving through the trees. Their red visors glowed faintly, marking death's approach. Reed hid behind the roots of a massive tree, his breath slow and steady. He could hear them talking in their language, mocking him, calling him prey. Then a small growl broke the silence. The first soldier turned his head, just in time to see 2 white fangs. Nia launched out of the brush like a bullet, hitting him square in the throat. His armor crumpled under her claws. Reed moved in from the opposite side, firing controlled bursts into their ranks. Plasma lit up the jungle, turning the leaves into fire. The battle lasted only minutes. The Crimson Pack, the best of the Vorn, was reduced to corpses at the feet of 1 human and 1 furious honey badger. Reed stood in the ashes, breathing hard. Naya circled the bodies, hissing at the fallen armor. Above, a warship recorded the scene through a reconnaissance drone. The footage would soon spread across the Vorn network. The predators who once hunted humans for entertainment now watched, trembling, as the human and his beast stared up at the sky. Reed raised his hand, pointing straight at the drone. "Tell your commander," he said coldly, "we're coming for him next." And far beyond the jungle, on every ship and outpost, predators started to whisper the same fear-filled question. What happens when the prey starts hunting back? The jungle burned for 3 nights. Vorn ships hovered above, scanning the destruction, but no living human signature appeared on their sensors. General Vrax stood inside his warship's command bay, claws clicking against the table in frustration. "Impossible!" he hissed. "A single human cannot destroy my entire hunting division." Yet every report said the same thing. Motion trackers gone dark, squads not responding, and every camera feed ending with the same blurred image, a human silhouette, beside a small beast with shining teeth. On the surface, Reed Carter and Naya moved like shadows. The air was thick with ash and alien blood. They slept in short bursts, hidden under the wreckage of a downed shuttle. Reed's body was covered with cuts and burns, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. He had stopped counting how many Vorn soldiers had died. The number didn't matter anymore. Survival was no longer enough. This was retribution. He whispered to Nia as he cleaned her fur. "They'll keep coming, but we're not running anymore." She gave a low growl, pressing closer to his hand, her small body tense but ready. In that moment, man and beast were more alike than ever, two living forces shaped by defiance. At dawn, Reed began building something from scavenged tech. The Vorn had left plenty of tools lying around. Their arrogance had always been their weakness. With careful hands, he rigged power cells into traps, using magnetic fields to overload their armor. Each step, each wire, each plan was a message to the galaxy. Humans adapt. Meanwhile, General Vrax called for reinforcements from the nearby outpost on Dareth 9. His fleet gathered, massive ships with glowing red engines, hundreds of soldiers armed with plasma blades. "Burn the jungle," he ordered. "I want ashes where that human stands." The skies opened hours later. Blue fire poured from the clouds, setting the forest ablaze. Trees split apart, the air filled with the shriek of alien metal. Reed grabbed Nia and ran through smoke and flame, dodging falling branches and explosions that tore the ground apart. But instead of fear, there was fury in his heart. "They think this will stop us," he muttered. "They just gave us cover." When the first platoon landed, expecting a burned corpse, they found nothing but silence. Then the traps started going off, one after another. Energy bursts tore through the trees, shredding armor, frying comm links. The forest had become a killing ground, designed by human hands. From the shadows, Reed and Nia struck. He used stolen weapons and precise aim. She went for throats and joints. Every ambush was faster, more brutal, more surgical. The aliens began to scream into their radios. "It's not possible! They see us before we—" And then static. The chaos reached the orbiting fleet. General Vrax's second-in-command, Captain Tural, hesitated as he watched the feed. "Sir," he said quietly, "we are losing more soldiers than in a full-scale battle." Vrax slammed his claws on the console. "He is one man, one animal. Crush them." But even as he spoke, a new transmission came through. It was faint, distorted, but every soldier who heard it felt their blood freeze. It was Reed's voice, calm, cold, certain. "You hunted humans for sport. Now you are prey. I'm coming for you, Virax." Silence followed. In the command bay, no one moved. The warlord's armor creaked as he exhaled slowly. "Prepare every ship," he growled. "He wants war. I'll give him extinction." On the jungle moon below, Reed looked to the sky as the stars began to move, thousands of ships descending. His muscles ached, his ammo was low, but his resolve had never been stronger. He glanced at Nia, whose fur glowed faintly from the firelight. "Guess they finally noticed us," he said with a tired grin. The honey badger bared her teeth, and for a heartbeat, the galaxy's predators had reason to be afraid again. The human had become the hunter. The skies over Barath Prime turned red as dawn broke through the smoke. The Vorn fleet darkened the horizon. Massive warships armed with energy cannons, their engines rumbling like thunder. To the Vorn, it was the sound of dominance. To Reed Carter, it was the sound of challenge. He crouched beside a burned-out shuttle, his armor cracked, his rifle nearly empty. Nia sniffed the air, her fur stiff with tension. They had been fighting for days, always moving, never resting. The forest that once hunted him was now his ally, a maze of traps, shadows, and corpses. But this time, the storm was coming from above. General Vrax stood on the command bridge of his flagship Vorkar, glaring at the holographic display. "Enough," he growled. "No more games, no more humiliation. Burn the moon, leave nothing alive." "Sir," one of his officers hesitated. "Our scouts report the human has already breached." The screen flickered, static. Then for a moment, the image of Reed appeared, dirty, blood-stained, alive. "You wanted a hunt, Vrax," Reed said, his voice cold and steady. So here I am. The feed cut out. The Vorn commander slammed his claws on the table. "Find him!" he roared. "Find him and tear his world apart!" But Reed was already inside their world. He had infiltrated the ruins of their forward base during the night. The place reeked of oil and blood. Alien corpses lay twisted among broken machines. He scavenged what he could: a plasma pistol, grenades, and a cracked datapad containing the layout of the Vorkar. He studied it under the weak light of a burning console. If he could reach that ship, if he could face Vrax himself, this war could end. "Naya," he whispered, "we're going up." Hours later, explosions lit the jungle as Reed fought his way to the extraction pads. Alien soldiers fell one by one, their armor scorched by his traps. Naya leapt through the chaos, her claws cutting through plasma suits like they were fabric. When they finally reached the landing platform, a stolen transport waited, small, fast, armed just enough to punch through the blockade. The ship's hatch hissed open. Reed and Naya stepped inside, the floor trembling as engines roared to life. He slammed the throttle forward, the sky streaking with fire as they rose through the burning atmosphere. Vorn fighters swarmed like hornets, chasing them through clouds of ash. Reed twisted the controls, weaving between falling debris. Energy bolts cut through the air, one grazing the wing, another slamming into the rear hull. "Naya!" he shouted. The honey badger growled, bracing herself as the ship spun. Reed triggered the ship's plasma cannons, shredding 2 pursuers before pulling into a sharp climb. "We're not dying here," he muttered. Then the Vorkar appeared. Massive, monstrous, blotting out the stars. Reed stared up at it, sweat dripping down his brow. "That's our target!" He pushed the engines beyond their limit. The stolen ship screamed through the void, heading straight for the Vorn flagship. Inside, alarms wailed as gunners tried to track him. They missed. Reed was too fast, too furious, too human. He slammed the ship into the outer docking bay, the impact sending a shockwave through the decks. Smoke and sparks filled the corridor as he emerged from the wreckage, weapon raised, Nia at his side. Behind him, the wrecked ship burned. Ahead, hundreds of armed Vorn soldiers stood waiting. Reed's lips curled into a grim smile. "You hunted humans for sport," he said quietly. "Now let's see how you handle a human who fights back." The hallway erupted in fire. Plasma bolts flashed, metal screamed, and the air turned to heat and fury. The honey badger lunged, a blur of teeth and claws. Reed followed, his weapon blazing, and for the first time in the history of the galaxy, the hunters knew what it meant to be afraid. The war had reached the stars, and it wasn't over yet. The Vorkar trembled under the chaos spreading through its corridors. Fire alarms screamed, oxygen vents hissed open, and alien soldiers shouted over the echoing gunfire. Reed Carter moved through the smoke like a ghost, bloody, determined, unstoppable. Naya ran beside him, a black streak of death between metal walls. Everywhere they went, panic followed. The Vorn had spent centuries believing themselves untouchable, the apex predators of the galaxy. But now their greatest warship was crawling with fear. One human and one honey badger had turned their arrogance into a weapon against them. Reed ducked behind a bulkhead as plasma bolts ripped across the hall. The air shimmered with heat. He tossed a stolen grenade, then kicked open a side door, dragging Nia through the explosion's flash. They entered a narrow maintenance shaft that led upward, toward the command deck. He pressed his back to the wall, breathing hard. "Almost there, girl," he whispered. Nia only grunted, her fur smoking slightly, claws slick with alien blood. She was hurt, but still ready. Always ready. Above them, General Vrax stood in the command chamber, surrounded by the blue glow of holograms. His claws twitched with rage as he watched the chaos on the security feeds. rooms collapsing, soldiers falling. "Seal the upper decks," he shouted. "Vent the atmosphere. Kill everything." "But, sir, our own troops! Do it!" The ship groaned as emergency seals clamped shut. Vacuum alarms echoed. Reed felt the sudden pull of air through the vent shafts. He grabbed Naya, clinging to a support beam as the pressure dropped. Metal doors slammed shut below them just before the air was sucked away. He gasped for breath, his vision dimming. Then, as the last lock sealed, the pressure stabilized again. Reed coughed hard, pulling himself up. His lungs burned. "He wants to suffocate us," he muttered. "Fine, let's take his air next." He climbed upward, pushing through the emergency ducts until they reached a service hatch leading into the reactor corridor. Blue light from the power core shimmered across Nia's eyes. "You see that?" he whispered. "That's the heart of his ship." He planted charges along the wall, connecting power leads from stolen rifles. Once this goes, the Vorkar dies with him. But before he could set the final charge, a shadow loomed. 3 Vorn guards burst from the side corridor, massive, armored, snarling. The leader raised a plasma blade. Reed didn't hesitate. He fired once, then twice, but the rounds bounced off their armor. They closed in, fast. One grabbed his arm, twisting his rifle away. Nia launched at the alien's throat, tearing through the joint seam of his armor. Blood splattered across the wall. The other 2 swung their blades wildly, sparks flying as they hit the metal railings. Reed rolled under one strike, drew his combat knife, and drove it through the alien's neck joint. He yanked it free, then shoved the 3rd Vorn into the reactor coolant flow. The creature screamed as the energy field vaporized him into glowing dust. Breathing heavily, Reed pressed his palm to the detonator. The reactor hummed behind him, unstable and shaking. "Time's up." He picked up Naya, holding her close as the charges armed themselves. They had minutes before the explosion. In the command chamber, alarms howled. "Reactor breach!" shouted one officer. Vrax froze, his eyes narrowing. "He wouldn't! He has!" the officer cried. "He's inside the core!" Vrax's snarl echoed through the bridge. "Find him!" But it was too late. The deck trembled. Red lights flashed as the power systems failed one by one. The mighty Vorkar, pride of the Vorn fleet, began to fall toward the moon below. Fire engulfed its engines. Metal screamed as gravity reclaimed it. Reed sprinted for the hangar, Naya clinging to his shoulder. Explosions ripped the halls apart behind them. He dived through a half-collapsed door, found an escape pod, and slammed the launch control. The pod rocketed free just as the Vorkar broke in half behind them, its core exploding in a blinding flash. The light washed over the night sky like a second sun. Inside the pod, Reed sat panting, the light reflecting in his eyes. Nia rested in his lap, chest rising and falling slowly. "Still alive," he whispered, stroking her fur. "Told you we'd make it." Far above, fragments of the Vorn flagship scattered into space, burning like dying stars. Across the galaxy, their war channels went silent. The predators who had once hunted humans for entertainment had just lost their greatest ship to one man and one small, furious creature. But Reed wasn't done. Not yet. Because deep inside him, he knew General Vrax wasn't dead. Not yet. And when the Vorn warlord rose again, the real fight would begin. The escape pod drifted through space like a dying ember, spinning slowly in the glow of the shattered Vorkar. Inside, Reed Carter sat strapped to the pilot's seat, every muscle aching. Nia rested against his chest, breathing steady despite the burns on her fur. Outside the viewport, debris floated past, chunks of metal, twisted armor, and silence. For the first time in days, there was no gunfire, no screaming, no alarms, just the quiet aftermath of vengeance. But Reed knew it wasn't over. The console flickered weakly. A faint radar ping echoed through the pod's speakers. Another ship, larger, slower, still functional, was approaching. Reed frowned. The Vaughn were relentless, but they didn't send rescue ships for the defeated. That meant only one thing. Vrax survived. Reed clenched his fists, anger flaring fresh. "You're too stubborn to die," he muttered. Nia lifted her head as if she understood. She growled low. A promise, more than a sound. Moments later, a tractor beam locked onto the pod. Reed didn't resist. He let it pull him in. He wasn't running anymore. Not from this, not from him. When the doors opened, bright lights flooded the small cabin. Armed Vorn soldiers surrounded the pod, weapons raised. At their center stood General Vrax, scarred, armor scorched, one eye replaced by a flickering cybernetic implant. His voice was cold and filled with venom. "You should have died with my ship, human." Reed unstrapped slowly, standing tall even with his wounds. "You hunted humans for sport," he said quietly. "You enjoyed watching them die." He looked down at Nia, who stepped forward, baring her teeth. "Now it's your turn to see what that feels like." Vrax laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "You think you can defeat me again, animal keeper?" Reed smiled faintly. "No, we can." Then he threw the first punch. The room erupted. Reed moved like a storm, grabbing weapons, breaking armor joints, turning the Vorn's own strength against them. Nia tore through their ranks, a black streak of fury that defied logic. Plasma bolts cracked through the air, sparks flying, screams echoing against the cold metal walls. Vrax swung his massive blade, striking sparks off the floor, as Reed ducked under it. The human's counterpunch drove a knife straight into the alien's shoulder. The warlord roared, grabbing Reed and hurling him across the room. He hit a console, pain shooting through his back, but he pushed himself up again. "You can't kill what doesn't fear you," Reed spat, blood on his lips. Vrax lunged again, but Nia was faster. She jumped, her claws finding the gap in his chest plate. He screamed as she tore into him, forcing him backward. Reed snatched a fallen plasma rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot pierced the alien's chest, sending him crashing into the wall with a shattering impact. Smoke filled the room. Vrax slumped to his knees, blood spilling from his wounds. His voice was a rasp. "You humans are monsters!" Reed stepped closer, his expression cold and unreadable. "No, we're survivors." He pulled the trigger one last time. The warlord's body hit the floor with a heavy thud. Silence returned. The last echo of the Vorn's arrogance died in that metallic chamber. Reed sank to the ground, exhausted. Nia limped toward him and pressed her head against his hand. He smiled faintly, brushing her fur. "It's over, girl." Through the shattered viewport, the stars stretched wide and endless. The galaxy would hear about this, about a human and a creature from a forgotten planet who brought down an empire built on fear. When the rescue beacon activated automatically, Reed didn't move. He just sat there, watching the wreckage drift into the void. "They thought they hunted humans for sport," he whispered. "Turns out, humans were just waiting to hunt back." He looked at Nia, who grunted softly in reply. Somewhere, deep in the cold of space, a legend was born, one the predators of the galaxy would never forget. The age of the hunters was over. The age of humanity had begun.